Hey, what's up, Greg? This is Isaac Weishaupt from IlluminatiWatcher.com. Hey, I was just reading on your Facebook that article about how they believe the North Koreans didn't have the infrastructure or the capability to actually do the supposed hacking of the Sony emails and whatnot. And I just thought that was interesting because I also received an email from someone that has some of the released information that shows Sony actually talked to the State Department to see if this was a good idea, because originally the interview was supposed to have a generic kind of nation like in the Borat movie, The Dictator. It was supposed to be a generic nation, but they decided to change it to North Korea after talking to the government, and the Rand Corporation was involved. So there's all kinds of weird buggery with all this. In fact, back in, I think it was June, I posted an article on my website where I was talking about how the movie poster look like the Baphomet, the horned deity. And anyways, there's a lot of weird stuff going on with the interview. I'd like to hear what else you've got on that, or if you got any more takes on that. Thanks. Peace.
In the 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from... In the 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higher Side Chats.
How's it going, Higher Chatters? Drinking that drink, smoking that smoke. From sunny San Diego, I'm Greg Carlwood. Last show of the year, and a big thanks to Isaac Weishaupt, who was my guest a few weeks ago talking about the Illuminati and hip-hop, for calling into the THC voicemail app and leaving me a little something to start the show with. That is really interesting that the government might have actually encouraged them to make the film about North Korea specifically, and only time is really going to tell if this is the start of a back and forth that gets engineered into a larger conflict with them, or if it just kind of goes away. But I think I've seen enough at this point to put my money on the idea that they were legitimately hacked by a private group who seems to also have had some insiders, or at least one. And I think they did a lot of real damage. Things like Project Goliath were exposed to show that Sony had been conspiring with the other major movie studios to take down the free internet. That is a real story here. And that's really what we need to ward off in the future, or they're going to box me out. Me and a million other people who are affecting the revenue stream of the old guard. Not something they enjoy. But then I think they did take the opportunity to spin that story into an ad campaign for the interview. The news media was more than happy to waste a week or two on that instead of the CIA's torture report that came out around the same time. Because if you remember, right before this interview drama started, every news organization had some headline like, "Should we charge Bush and Cheney? What's going on?" And then it all disappeared. So yeah, it became a win-win for Sony and the US government, for multiple different reasons, and I'm not surprised. They are masters of spin and manipulation. But fingers crossed, this episode's going to be on the internet long after this drama is over, and anyone who's grabbing it thinking they're listening to a show about magic is not going to want to hear me ramble on about this old movie anymore. So let's not waste any more time before we get down to the topic at hand, and that topic is Thelema and magic. You know, as a conspiracy show, we talk to a lot of researchers that point to powerful members of the power pyramid using magic and holding these practices and tools in high regard for themselves. And to what extent you believe that to be true is really your call, but we can't deny that these magical orders and tools and philosophy and rituals exist, and if nobody was getting results, I'm not so sure they'd be around all these years later. And we've talked to Lone Milo Duquette of the OTO about their angle in the past. We've also talked with Alex Bolin of the Alex Cast about chaos magic. We talked to Simon Parks about his Illuminati family, who's apparently on the magic side of the power pyramid. And today we're going to tap right back into that magic vein with Dr. David Shoemaker in a more practical, down-to-earth way. He does a great job of explaining the new vocabulary involved, breaking down the groups and the names that we hear about. Like for me, now I feel that if I was going to pursue this further, I'd probably go towards AA rather than the OTO. Well, you'll hear about all that. And one last thing I do need to throw in here before we get into the show, is that this is the last episode of the month. So again, I take all the donations we've gotten into the Money Bomb this month, and I give half of that back to a random listener, and I have them call in to make it official. This month we gave out $374. Not bad. So we're going to hear from the winner. His name is Isaac. How synchronistic to get 2 phone calls from Isaacs this time around. And then we're getting real occulty with the wordsmith and magician, Dr. David Shoemaker, on the other side.
Hi Greg, this is Isaac, the December winner of the Money Bomb. I just want to thank you and all the people for this Money Bomb. This couldn't have come at a better time for me. My wife recently got laid off from work, and so we've actually been cutting back on a lot of our expenses. One of the next things up on the chopping block was the Higher Side Chats along with our Netflix account. But now we get to keep Greg Carlwood, and we also get to keep Frank Underwood, so that's a good thing. Seriously though, I do really believe in what you're doing with your show, and I'm really glad to have been with you for this time. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a lot of money back right into it. So I've subscribed for my whole next year of 2015, so that's all taken care of. Plus I've had my eye on the Obama conspiracy for a while, so I want to pick that up as well. As far as my favorite shows go, I really like the ones that are based off of the music industry, like Professor Griff, Mr. Gates, and Isaac Winthrop. I think those are really interesting. The Marty Lee show is really good. He has a really interesting way of looking at things, but I think my favorite show so far that I've heard is the one with Daniele Bolelli. That one I think is actually what I hope to hear a lot more of, because I like how it shows the positive steps that we could take to move forward, so I really like that. Again, I just want to thank everybody for what they've done, and for you for putting on this show, and for all the energy and that you put into preparing it. It's a great show. Again, thank you for everything you've done. Thanks, guys.
All right, people, we've spent a lot of time analyzing the toolbox of the planet's puppet masters, and I think we've seen enough at this point to know that there are secret sciences and magical practices that members of the power pyramid hold in very high regard. And today, instead of dissecting the symbolism of Jay-Z's latest video or exploring rumors of multidimensional demonic entities manifesting their will through contact with the elite, we're going to dig into some of these magical practices themselves and see what we can use for the betterment of our own lives and our own understanding on that ever-nagging quest for enlightenment. And today's guest is just the man to lead that charge. Dr. David Shoemaker is a clinical psychologist specializing in Jungian and cognitive behavioral psychotherapy, and is very well versed in the esoteric arts as well. He's the chancellor of the International College of Thelema and has been a member of the OTO and AA since 1993, where he's had over 15 years experience in supervising students in these traditions. David has also written a book entitled Living Thelema, which fuses this esoteric wisdom with his knowledge of cognitive science. He also has a podcast of the same name, and I can't wait to get down to it. It's a fascinating topic with a perfect guest, a guy that I would call the Dr. Drew of Magic, Dr. David Shoemaker. Welcome to THC.
Well, thanks so much, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man, it's a real honor of mine. You're a very accomplished guy in both traditional and unorthodox ways, and that's something I respect a lot. To kind of get us started, I gave some of the bullet points to your journey in that intro, but what was your journey into magic like? I mean, what got you really exploring this more seriously?
Well, I came out of college more or less a scientifically oriented atheist, had grown up with some religious tradition, nothing that was ingrained too deeply on one side of my family, my mom, and then my dad was a philosophy professor, so I got that influence. But anyway, I came out of college without much spiritual or religious focus. Started studying in grad school more deeply in the works of Carl Jung, who, as your listeners probably know, frequently touches on aspects of what we might call mystical or even magical topics, mythology, comparative religion. You know, he goes way beyond the surface in terms of human psychology, and so it was in reading Jung that I realized it was tugging on some part of me. I wanted a spiritual path, and I hadn't quite realized that I did. So through Jung, I started exploring some of the writers in Western esotericism that were influenced by Jung or cross-referenced him a lot, most particularly Israel Regardie, who of course had studied in the Golden Dawn tradition and had worked as Aleister Crowley's secretary for a few years, and read his book called The Middle Pillar, which is all about the interface between the Kabbalistic tree of life and Kabbalistic psychology and Jungian psychology. So this just blew the doors open for me, and I realized that this was the path I had to pursue. So somewhere in the middle of grad school, my life took a significant turn, and really the turn that has shaped it ever since, which was to follow this path of the interface of magic and psychology.
Right on. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. I just haven't ever taken the time to dig much further than the 101 stuff. We've done a couple shows about magic, and Crowley comes up pretty often, but we don't ever really talk about Thelema or AA very much. Can you give us some background on those groups?
Sure. Well, Thelema is not a group per se. Thelema is the philosophy or the religion overall, depending on how you think of it. Within that, much as within Christianity or any other religious approach, there are different organizations. So within Thelema, there's a few major threads. The Ordo Templi Orientis is a Masonic type fraternal organization that's very social in nature, and that's probably the largest formal organization within the umbrella of Thelemic tradition. Mm-hmm. And that's the OTO. I've been a member of that since '93. The AA is an entirely different setup. The AA was Crowley's first serious attempt at forming a magical order of his own after he left the Golden Dawn in 1900 or so. So the AA is an individual student-to-teacher relationship. The whole organization is just based on individual relationships like that. So you're assigned one teacher, and there's no group meetings for the most part. There's no social events. It's entirely about your individual spiritual progress. And so entirely different from a social group like the OTO. Mm-hmm. Then in 1973, my teacher, Phyllis Seckler, who was a student of Jane Wolfe and Carl Germer, who were students of Crowley in AA, started the College of Thelema, and I continued that as the International College of Thelema with Phyllis's blessing after her death. So what we do in the International College of Thelema is train people in group classes or individually online at a distance to get the basic foundations of magical practice, readings, daily ritual, meditation, to get trained in those. And then finally, as one aspect of the International College of Thelema, we have the Temple of the Silver Star, which is an initiatory order based on the Tree of Life, patterned on the degrees and the degree symbolism of the Golden Dawn. And we take Thelema and its foundational practices and teach you that over the course of an initiatory experience, where you get a particular set of practices based on the degree you're in, and when you pass certain tests, you advance to the next degree, and so on. So those are just the things that my fingers are in, but there's a lot of other smaller groups out there that are doing wonderful work within Thelema as well.
Right on. So what is it about Thelema that you would say separates it from other schools of magic?
Well, the law of Thelema, I should probably define this pretty explicitly for people. The law of Thelema, you've probably heard Crowley saying, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law."
Right.
And that's one of the most misunderstood things Crowley ever says as well. The common misunderstanding is that what Crowley was saying was, you can just do whatever you want. And that is actually the opposite of what he was saying. He was saying that each person has a true will, a formula of living, a reason for their incarnation that is deeper and truer than anything their surface personality might like or dislike. The true will is essentially our life purpose. And do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law means that our responsibility as humans, in terms of our own evolution and spiritual path, is to tap into and understand what that true will is, and then create a life where we can do it peacefully and joyously and vigorously. And the idea is that the more people are able to create a life of true will for themselves, the more people live that out in their lives and make room for others to do the same, the better the universe works, the better human society works. Much like, an ecosystem works best if the trees get to do their thing, and the grass gets to do its thing, and the animals get to each have their own role in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
A human society, if everything's allowed to be itself, works better. So do what thou wilt simply means fulfill your natural purpose according to your particular skills and gifts and talents, and give room to others to do the same. So one thing that differentiates Thelemic Magick from any other branch, except those that have been influenced by Thelema, is the law of Thelema as a central guiding principle for how to know what magic you should do. If you have a goal, a magical goal that you want to do a ritual to achieve, but it's at odds with your true will, it's at odds with the actual laws of nature that apply to you, that's quite an uphill battle. You're going to be working against what the universe is trying to do.
Right.
And so Thelema gives us a chance to refine our ability to do powerful magic because we're not swimming upstream. We're recognizing how we can be a part of the flow of the universe and choosing our ritual aims to be in line with that. So that's probably the most fundamental philosophical and practical difference and something that makes Thelemic Magick distinct.
Philosophically, I guess it doesn't sound that different from an Eastern philosophy like Taoism or something, just maybe a more active version.
Right, yeah. I think it's dare I call it practical Taoism? I think Crowley was heavily influenced by Taoism, really had a lot of respect for it, and other traditions as well. But yeah, it's not, in many ways, it's not that different. And yet what Crowley did was brought his awareness of traditional Western magical tools to the table, and Western magical esoteric instruction in mystery schools, training orders, and things like that, brought that to bear on that philosophy and created a system in both the AA and the OTO that just to unfold this beautifully. And it's been a great privilege in my life to see these systems in action and see that they actually work.
Yeah, that's the kind of the aspect that I love about it so much, or that I'm so interested in, is that juicy stuff. And what I've heard you say that really got me jazzed up, and I couldn't agree more with, is that there's a lot of historical and theoretical content out there about the Thelema and the rituals, but not much practical information. And that's sort of been one of the major hurdles for me in actually getting started. I'm kind of just unsure where exactly, and I guess, do you find that to be a pretty common problem, is people not having a lot of practical information how to incorporate it into their regular life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a core problem, as you mentioned, that I address that quite frequently in my podcasts and the book. It's partly that there's not enough practical instruction. It's also that there's an awful lot of not so good practical instruction out there.
Right.
And there's a lot of good stuff too, don't get me wrong, but there's it's the kind of publishing field where there can be a lack of quality control. It's easy for somebody without much actual training or pedigree to decide they're a teacher and write stuff that has appeal but isn't actually grounded in personal practice or the experience of many years supervising others. So, it's kind of a minefield out there. So what I've tried to do is ground everything I'm teaching in my actual experiences as a teacher, trying to get across what I've actually noted works and doesn't work for people. I never teach about anything I haven't tried or done, and that's in the tradition of AA. No one gets assigned to teach some course on something they haven't experimented with. And so I really tried to remedy that. And I really was sick of so much emphasis purely on historical or philosophical aspects of this. I think that stuff is great and important, but keeping that in balance with really practical, usable instruction was really important to me.
Yeah, I think another kind of issue with this that a lot of people might have is that they want to get a clear idea of exactly how it'll benefit their lives before they go through all the work and the somewhat daunting research and start doing these introductory rituals. But it seems like the effects can be so personal that it's hard to clearly define the value of the practice before you do it, almost in a catch-22 sort of way. Would you say that's true, or can you give us some idea of how it could benefit people's lives?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think there's definitely an element here where, let's take something like the lesser ritual of the pentagram, which is a common daily brief magical ritual that people use quite frequently as just their bedrock of what they do every day.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't say to someone, here's what you will experience if you do this. One of the reasons you can't say that is that experiences vary. Another reason it's not so good to say that is that you front load their own experience with what you've told them they're supposed to experience.
Gotcha.
And that cuts through the intended sort of behavioral science slant of Thelema, which is try this stuff, take note of your results, see what you experience, and draw your own conclusions about what it means. So if you tell someone you're gonna experience this, and then off to the left you're gonna see this angel appear, or
Mm-hmm.
and you mess up their own unique and naive experience that then becomes the basis of their own progress. But I could compare it to something like meditation or relaxation practices. You can tell someone, if you do this, you're going to have a more relaxed physiological response every day. Your autonomic nervous system is going to be calmer. You're going to find it easier to concentrate, and you'll probably notice mood improvements. You can say all that, but until someone's done it and really experienced it, it's hard for them to grasp what that would really be like. Similarly with magic, the changes can be pretty subtle and gradual, but when you've had a chance to work with a teacher or with a set of people who have been consistently doing these practices, you begin to see the bigger picture of the effects on them. You can see people who seem to be trending toward building lives that are more vibrant, and they seem to be happier. They seem to be doing things that are more natural expressions of what they're good at, and that's kind of contagious in a good way. You like being around people that are glowing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the best ways to if you want convince someone that this stuff works, is to have them simply be around people who've been working it.
Right. I totally agree with that, because when I listen to guys like Lone Milo DeQuette talk, he's very articulate. Some of the things I've read from Crowley are also very high level and impressive. So that's kind of what I look at and determine if something has value. I feel the same way about mushrooms. George Carlin and Bill Hicks, two of my favorite comedians, both liked mushrooms. So I thought, hey, maybe I should try this, and maybe this is where they get their insight. So
right.
Yeah, I definitely think there's some value in trusting the messenger. If you like what they're saying and you kind of admire them, look at the tools they use.
Yeah, exactly. It's not quite like, I'd like to be more like this person in the specific sense.
Right.
I want to do their job or have their personality exactly. But I think when we're around someone who's really living their true will, and especially if they've had some significant attainment, spiritually speaking, it something resonates in us, and what we want to be more like is more like someone who's living from that center, as opposed to living reactively and negatively through their lives. So I think that's the positive spiritual contagion that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's a good clarification too, because it is just seeing someone who is uniquely themselves, and I think that's kind of what a lot of people value. Yeah, it's not exactly mirroring this particular guru or that one, but right. There is just something so awesome about seeing someone who is uniquely themselves, not self-conscious of it. They are very one with the Tao, very Zen, those type of people. Yeah, it's something to strive for, definitely. And if this is a tool that gets some people there versus some other ones, then great. I mean, I'm definitely interested in it. Let's tell people a little bit more about the lesser ritual of the pentagram. It is a basic 101 ritual. Anyone who's looked deeply into this will have heard of it. But for someone who wanted to get an idea of a good introductory practice, walk us through what that looks like.
Okay, sure. Well, just quickly on the theory of it, what we're trying to do with that ritual is help the magician identify as a being that has mastery over the realm around them. The physical realm that they live in, the psychological realm that can be symbolically understood to be represented by the four elements, fire, earth, air, and water. At the center of that, or at the top of that pentagram of the four elements, is the spirit. And so it's the four elements and spirit are the 5 points of the pentagram. And what we're trying to do, again, is help the individual magician begin to build that model of self into themselves, into their conception of themselves, so that they have ability to work with parts of themselves, like the fiery part for devotion and emotion and aspiration, or the airy part for subconsciousness and intellect and so on. So once they have begun to build this model of inner elements, they can use those parts of self more specifically to meet their goals. Mm-hmm. So the ritual does several things. It identifies the magician with the elements and as a master of the elements. The pentagram becomes, therefore, a symbol of what we call the microcosm, that the human being is a microcosm of the entire universe. And when we want to affect something in the so-called outer world, we begin by affecting its corresponding part in the inner world.
Okay.
So, enough theory, what do you do for the pentagram ritual? You start with what's called the Kabbalistic cross, which is based on some traditional Hebrew materials, drawing a cross on your body and sort of locating yourself as the center of the universe, so to speak. And then at the four quarters, you draw large pentagrams, visualizing them with your mind's eye, and vibrating, that is, intoning in a particular technique, the divine names that go with those quarters. You start in the east and move around to the southwest and north. And then you come back to the center and you invoke the four archangels, which are traditionally said to oversee the well-being of humanity. In this case, that the traditionally would be Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel in the east, south, west, and north, respectively. And what we're trying to do there is whatever these archangels may be, whether you see them as the true external entities, or whether you see them as exalted aspects of self, doesn't really matter, because if you do this, you'll discover what it is for you. What we're trying to do there, is, however, is to help the magician become a powerful battery of force, to use the ideas of these archangels or their actual presence, again, depending on your interpretation, to be a power source for dealing with the four elements, for living in a balanced way between and among the elements, and exalting the consciousness to spiritual realms, to get beyond the personality, to see that we're divine beings that are living in human flesh. And then the closing part of the ritual repeats the Kabbalistic cross. So that's it in a nutshell.
Right on.
And as you alluded, the only way to really know what it is and what it does is to practice that daily for a long time.
Yeah, and as I understand it, you can do that actual ritual for multiple purposes, right? I mean, there's banishing purposes, there's invoking purposes.
Yeah. Basically, one of the ways Crowley talked about this, I'll paraphrase, is that the banishing makes you feel clean and invoking makes you feel holy.
Okay.
So the daily use of the lesser banishing ritual is something of a hygiene practice, magical brushing of the teeth, if you will. And the invoking ritual is a power up. You're saying to the universe, okay, let the powers of the elements come into me and boost my energy level and give me an enhanced ability to master my life as I go out into the world and to live in balance and act in balance. So you've got the basic daily rituals that can be invoking or banishing, and then there are advanced rituals, usually called the greater ritual of the pentagram or hexagram or so on, where you're using versions of these rituals to invoke specific forces, like a specific element. You might want to do a ritual to invoke fire specifically, or you might want to do a ritual to invoke the powers of the planet Jupiter. or the mythological basis of the planet Jupiter is one way of putting that.
Right.
So yeah, lots of specific ways to tweak these.
Very cool. Let's talk about the true will a little more. I think this is a sexy idea for people because a lot of us are working the register at Target or selling insurance for Allstate, and we feel pretty expendable. So the idea of this higher cosmic purpose is very intriguing, or this internal drive to do something. It's attractive. How can we kind of start to hone in on our own and really get a good sense for our own true will?
Well, one of the most important things to understand about true will, aside from that it's not just what you want at the personality level, is that it's not true job. It's not your true will is to become a dentist, that sort of thing. So the person working at the register at Target may be very much in line with their true will, not because their true will is to work at Target, but because there is something about the way they affect the world that is unique to them and would be present whether they were working at Target at the register or they were a stockbroker in New York City or they were a shepherd in Mongolia. Mm-hmm. There's something about them. They are a force of nature, a unique force of nature that does a certain thing to the world. The task of true will is to discover that force. So I teach a lot of tools and sort of mental tricks, ways to trick ourselves into seeing past the obvious things about ourselves into the more subtle trends of our personalities and our working in the world. For example, I talk about this in the book. Think about what happens to a room full of people when you walk into it. How do you influence that? Does the room kind of get buzzy and talkative? Does it get more serious? Do people laugh more? Do people act goofier? What's the subtle influence you have over that environment? Similarly, in line with a lot of the recent literature in the last couple decades on, finding life purpose and so on. When do you feel most yourself? When do you feel like all the gears of your being are kind of working together the way they're supposed to, and you feel happy and engaged? And, what are those peak moments for you? Those will be clues that whatever you're doing right then may be very closely linked to your true will. Mm-hmm. For me, for example, the first time I was able to stand up in front of a group of people and talk about dream analysis, I remember it like it was yesterday. That was the moment when I realized that teaching a certain area of subject matter was just vital for me, that was something I was good at, loved doing, people understood it, they connected, Mm-hmm. So that moment probably set my compass in a way that brought me to the place of doing things like the Living Thelema podcast or the teaching I've been doing over the past couple of decades. So everyone can, if they pay attention, can find those clues in a similar kind of way about what really makes them tick and is going to be, helping them unveil the true will.
Right. I've kind of heard it described as, you got to get to a deep, deep meditative place. If you were to strip everything away, all the distractions, all of your ego, and, whatever's left there would be the true will.
I think I mostly agree with that as stated. I think what we can lay on top of that is that when you quiet down the personality and sort of the societal programming about what we're supposed to like or supposed to do, or what our parents told us we were supposed to do or not supposed to do, whatever. Mm-hmm. When you strip all that away and your mind is quiet, yes, it is easier to hear the voice of self with a capital S, as Jung would have called it. But then the personality itself becomes a vehicle for true will. It's not that we are trying to discard our outer personality and our, the way we interact in an outward way. What happens is that becomes a tool. It becomes, in fact, the perfect tool for the execution of our true will when we use it mindfully. So for me, I'm a fairly introverted person by nature. And therefore, the fact that I got into being a psychotherapist and then I sit in quiet rooms with one person at a time and most of my day is that, or that I'm I'm able to lecture to a room full of people, but in my own sort of down to earth, quiet way. I'm not a showman or something.
Right.
So for me and my true will, those aspects of personality are not limitations. They're actually fulfillments of true will.
Mm-hmm.
But for someone else, those would screw them up. If someone were trying to, if they determined that their true will was to, be a circus performer or something, or that was an expression of it, then introversion and a lack of desire to be in the spotlight all the time might work against them. So what I'm really trying to say at essence is just that the personality, rightly understood, is quite usable as an aspect of the expression of true will, and it's quite valuable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not about getting rid of it. It's more of like a fine tuning, I guess, of what makes us us.
Yeah, making that ego transparent rather than making it vanish entirely. We still need it to work in the world.
Well said. Another one of the aspects that I'm really interested in is the idea of contact with something non-human, some non-human entity. But there's many different opinions on what or who is being contacted with these rituals. We've kind of talked about that a little bit already, but some do say you're just communicating with higher aspects of the self. Some say there's a whole hierarchy of beings. Some think there's just a particular basket of beings that you can communicate with. What's your interpretation of this, non-physical realm that we're dealing with in these entities?
Well, there again is another place where it is really helpful to not define it for people. When you're doing it over time and you have multiple experiences and you take note of what those are and you track that, you'll form your own opinions about what's the reality of things. And one of those opinions that you have to form for yourself is, does it seem like I'm talking to a true external entity or not? Or maybe there's some way in which it's both, where it's an aspect of self and a truly external entity. But I always am very careful to just make sure people come to their own conclusions about this. Mm-hmm. I can tell you for sure, though, that my experience and the experience of many magical practitioners in this tradition is that there are sure as hell times when what it feels like is there is another nervous system in the room, mm-hmm. and you are talking to something that is beyond talking, broadly speaking, you're interacting consciousness-wise with something that is well beyond anything you've ever thought of as yourself, seems to be speaking with a voice and a consciousness and a perspective on the universe quite different from anything you've known as yourself. So those experiences are definitely out there and real. But then what do you do with that experience? How do you interpret that? Mm-hmm. How do you file that away in your in your database and learn from it? But it's a fascinating thing, and that's one of those things I didn't necessarily know I was tripping into when I started this work. I just knew I wanted to explore a spiritual path and find some mystery, mm-hmm. And yet here I am talking to angels.
Yeah, man, that's why I get so much anxiety before a show like this, before I'm interviewing someone on a topic like magic, because I like to break these things down and define them and go through all the fundamentals, but a topic like this is just so slippery and subjective that it is really hard to nail those types of things down. And I get it on one level, but on another level, you'll hear me asking the same kind of questions over and over again. But let's talk about the Holy Guardian Angel. I see this term being used a lot in Thelema, and at first I was really turned off by it because of the religious context, but, that's just my own problem, I guess. But tell us about that. I mean, this is apparently a big aspect of Thelema, right?
Yes, in the system of AA, everything the magician is doing for probably the first many years of their practice is all directed towards this attainment that Crowley called the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. All the magical tools you're practicing, all of the different traditions you experiment with, all the meditation, everything, the entire unfolding of your life, in fact, is pointed toward this attainment. And the reason for that, the reason for the emphasis on that, is that this attainment represents a stage of conscious connection between the everyday ego and the deeper self, a connection between our normal waking consciousness as a human and real divinity that lives within us and can be experienced as an external being that is our personal God, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And once we have forged this conscious connection, the knowledge of true will is much, much more conscious and explicit. Our ability to act on it and make effective change in our lives is therefore enhanced also, because the more specifically we know what our true will is, the more ease we have in making a life that creates space for it, that facilitates it.
Mm-hmm.
So the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, and knowledge and conversation are both archaic terms for sexual contact, by the way.
Hey now.
So there's an ecstatic component here.
Mm-hmm.
The knowledge and conversation of the HGA is, for most people, the pinnacle of their personal spiritual development. And as we were talking earlier about being around people that really make us excited because they're being themselves fully.
Mm-hmm.
This is the shining example of that principle, that when you're around someone who's had this attainment, it's not just that you feel them being fully themselves, it's that you feel them kind of, you can sort of see in their lives and in their eyes, like there's something much grander coming through in the way they interact and the way they live and the way they talk and the way they are. And these folks will be more rare in today's world. So yes, everything is aimed at the HGA for a long time in our paths, and there's more to do after that. But that's the pinnacle of attainment for most humans right now. Crowley felt that getting human society, to be a place where the expectation was that everyone was going to have this experience is what he was brought to do. To teach that next step of evolution, spiritual evolution for humanity. Can you imagine what the world would be like if it were assumed that you go to school, and instead of you go to school and you go to college and then you get your job and you work there for 50 years and then you retire? Instead of that being the assumption, if the assumption that everyone was going to go on this inward journey, and all our educational systems and societal structures were set up to honor that and promote that, that's huge. And I think that was Crowley's vision.
Yeah, radically different world. Do you think this is something that this communication with the HGA, do you think this is something that comes more naturally to some people than others?
Well, I will say that, and I'm probably mostly just echoing Carl Jung here, that I think these inner journeys are sometimes easier for introverts.
Mm-hmm.
in terms of coming more naturally to them, because the inner world of an introvert is the main place they live.
Right.
And it's the main place they get their energy, and it's the main place they want to go when they want to recharge. And so you tell an introvert, okay, I want you to sit quietly for half an hour and meditate. It's going to be easier for them to swallow probably than somebody who would rather be out at a party.
Right.
So parties are great, but not necessarily the things that facilitate spiritual growth.
Right. It's so hard for me to sit there and focus. It definitely is. I can sit there and play a deep video game for a good 6-hour session and not move. I could watch an entire season of The Sopranos without getting off the couch. But if you want me to just sit there and clear my mind, well, you got about 5 minutes before I lose interest in that. I have a deep, philosophical interest in it, and I'll read about it all day. But to actually sit there and do it, it's very trying.
Yeah, it is, but it is trainable, and that's why the main trait that you need, no matter what your personality is, what your proclivities are as a being, social or otherwise, persistence and self-discipline are really the core skills that are going to fuel anyone's attainment. No matter who they are, they're going to have some aspects of their personality that are going to occasionally get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
The ego eventually, really, once it figures out that it's going to be less important than it used to be, finds ways to object to that, finds ways to assert itself and insist that we pay attention to it and do what it wants. And it's like a little kid that's tantruming in some ways. But that's trainable, and with persistence and self-discipline and perseverance. I've never seen anyone work the system of AA, for example, and fail at it.
Interesting.
What happens is people stop doing it.
Right, yeah.
They may lose interest. They may decide some other thing appeals to them more. But I've never seen anyone stick at it and do step by step the system and not get the desired results. That's, as I was saying about how gratifying it's been to see the system work, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That over and over again, people walk these steps, and sure enough, they work. And that really makes me happy. This is one of the things that made my teacher, Phyllis, the happiest as well. When she would see someone have success, it would just light her up.
Absolutely. And do you see a place, I don't know if it's talked about that often, but do you personally see a place for psychedelics in this practice at all?
I think a lot of people have experience with psychedelics that, and this is not a unique perspective from me by any means, but kind of shows them the possibilities for alternate ways of perceiving the universe and perceiving ourselves.
Yes.
And so when you've had that, if you haven't had that, it's probably trickier to imagine that it's worth striving for. If you've had a taste of that, I think it's easier to go, oh, I want to get back there in a sustainable way.
Yep.
And the practices we're discussing here are definitely sustainable ways of staying tapped into some of the types of visionary consciousness that psychedelics can at least give us glimpses of. Where the problems can come in is when people are not working with an underlying basis of self-discipline and training to make the most of those experiences,
mm-hmm.
Or when the drugs become the end rather than the means.
Yeah.
But that's highly individual. But to answer your basic question, I think, yeah, I've seen a lot of people have experiences with psychedelics that fuel or inspire their subsequent work.
Yeah, I think you're spot on the way you said it. It shows you the possibilities, because for me, that is exactly what has happened. I mentioned I had a really hard time meditating, but I've had psychedelic experiences where I really did feel like I was communicating with something outside of myself. And so it's like, yeah, now that I've validated that there's something there and it isn't all just hocus pocus, maybe now I should go back and perfect the interaction, in a more sustainable way.
Right.
I couldn't agree more with that. Let's talk about Crowley's holy guardian angel. I guess he used to talk about communicating with Aiwass. Is that who he would consider his?
Yeah. We pronounce it Aiwass, and it's the entity that he apparently first encountered consciously when the Book of the Law, which is the foundational religious text of Thelema, was what Crowley called dictated to him, and he served as the scribe in 1904 in Egypt. So this is a relatively brief book in 3 chapters, and his experience was, through various circumstances, was told to go to a particular place 3 days in a row and just be ready to write. So his experience, as he described it, was as if someone was standing over his shoulder, just speaking in a voice, and he wrote it all down. So he never claimed actual authorship of the Book of the Law or other holy texts of Thelema. He felt he was the channel for them. In modern parlance, these would probably be called channeled writings, but he didn't use that term. Aiwass was this entity. He later came to realize that he came to feel that Aiwass was not some random entity that was dictating this stuff to him, but was actually his own holy guardian angel. And he spent the rest of his life refining that relationship in one form or another.
So what about Lam? Was Lam just another entity, an earlier entity that he channeled?
There are some circles in Thelema, subsets of people that place a lot of emphasis on that, and I'm not one of them. But Crowley had contact with a lot of beings over the years in various rituals, sometimes on purpose, in terms of, let's call forth the spirit of Mars and interact with it and so on. And other times he would just be in a kind of a trance state and ask for a guide to get a particular answer to a question or have assistance with a project of some kind, and something would present itself. So yeah, Lam was along those lines. But again, I'm very hesitant to draw conclusions for anyone about the nature of any of these entities.
Right. Yeah, of course. So if there's a whole plethora of possibilities of contact with some type of entity, is there a way we can tell if we're communicating with our true holy guardian angel versus some other entity? Like, is there a distinct difference?
I often talk about this using the metaphor of a radio receiver, where what we're trying to do over the course of our early training that is before knowledge and conversation. What we're trying to do is refine our ability to tune in this radio to receive that one particular station that is the voice of our angel. And maybe in this day and age, the metaphor of turning a big dial on a radio is not something anyone relates to anymore. But you're trying to tune it in, and you hear it, and then you can't find it again, or you find the wrong station, or you turn past it and then you can't get back to it. But eventually, you know exactly how to tune into that one particular voice, that one particular station that you have come to recognize has a certain quality that speaks through and as your deep conscience, that has a quality of realness to it that is entirely unique. And if you've walked the steps of AA under competent supervision, there are checks and balances in place all along the path to make sure you're refining the specific tools that you need in order to be able to make that determination. So that's one of the important things about this structured training, is that there are safeguards and you're building up your toolbox all along the way, so that when the time comes, you've quite organically arrived at a place where you're able to distinguish the voice of the angel eventually from any million other voices that we have running through our heads all the time.
Right on. So do you think that's the value of something like the OTO versus like chaos magic, is having that ritual step by step so you're ready?
Well, the step-by-step training in terms of the HGA is not OTO per se, but more of the AA or Temple of the Silver Star and groups like that. That's just where we aim our training.
Gotcha.
Chaos magic is interesting, because that's another thing that people can use that term any way they want, essentially, and it's sometimes hard to know that. And like left hand and right hand path, people say those things, and you never know what they're exactly meaning by it, because it means so many different things to so many different people. But yeah, basically, if we don't learn the alphabet, we're not going to be able to put words together as competently. And once we've learned the alphabet, we may decide we want to rearrange it and throw out the rule book. And that's cool.
Well said.
But if you throw out the rule book before you've learned the rules, you're not working with the full power that is available to you. So sometimes I think people are drawn to chaos magic because it seems, frankly, easier.
Right.
It seems like a more direct path to just getting into doing magic. And it may be more direct, but if you end up taking longer because you haven't learned the alphabet, it's not faster.
Right.
It's just diving in head first and then realizing that, you want to learn some swimming skills first.
Right. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
I just one last thing on that. I don't want to take anything away from the value of experimentation and innovation, and people. I don't want people to be afraid to experiment and try different techniques. So I'm not saying to not do that, or I'm not trying to devalue that, but I am trying to emphasize the value of having some structure to it.
Right on. Right on. So is there I guess to make this a little less broad for people, or a little less abstract, is there a typical process to this kind of courtship? I know one of the biggest milestones that people talk about is receiving the name of their holy guardian angel, but I'm unclear if there are any other big milestones along the process where, people feel like they've reached a new level, outside of that one of knowing the name.
So milestones before full knowledge and conversation.
Right.
Yeah, getting the name is a big one, which incidentally doesn't always happen earlier in the path. Sometimes that's later, but it's not uncommon for that to happen earlier. There's a certain stage which I've noted tends to happen around, not to get overly jargony here, but there's a grade of the AA system called Zealoter, which corresponds to the sphere of Yesod on the Tree of Life. And at that stage, there tends to be a breakthrough in awareness of the life force flowing through us, essentially a kind of a particular brand of Kundalini awakening and awareness that marks another stage of this building relationship with the angel. It's like we recognized certain symbols that start to vibrate within us, like the name. And then we recognize that, in many senses, the power that we have previously thought of as this universal force outside of ourselves is actually working through us. So that's another milestone. At later stages, still before knowledge and conversation, you get refinements to ritual and symbol. To clarify, what you're essentially doing in the movement toward knowledge and conversation is building your own religion. And you are the prophet, you are the high priest or priestess. The rituals and symbols and ritual gestures and forms of worship ultimately will be crafted in an entirely unique way just for you and your angel. And that happens very, very organically as you go through the process. So it's not exactly like a bell ringing kind of milestone like some of the other things, but it's incredibly important that you'll find you're given all the tools you need. And all you have to do is be paying attention and learn how to increasingly integrate them into your acts of worship, essentially.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, but I am curious if we were meant to have this connection with a particular spiritual entity. A lot of people say that this entity is there waiting for you, just waiting for you to learn the language to communicate with it. It's there ready. Mm-hmm. If we're supposed to have this, why does it require so much work and attention and focus rather than it being more of just an automatic thing?
I think one of the answers to that is human society's relationship to our egos. We have a society, particularly in the West, that doesn't do a very good job at all of helping us listen inwardly. We don't have a very meditative society. We have a very extroverted, kind of louder and faster is better society. And to some extent, what we have to do is deprogram ourselves from the focus on the outer and refocus that on the inner. I think we also have to build our personality before we can understand how to use it. And so for maybe the first half of our lives, into our 30s probably, at least, we're finding out who we are. And if we don't, just as a simple human personality, if we don't know who we are yet, then how can we really discover the unique ways to use who we are to execute our true will? If you see what I'm getting at, that
yeah, well said.
We got to see what the tools are, before we can use them, and so that's another reason that we don't just pop out of the womb with cosmic consciousness. We've got to build ourselves into a person, and then take it from there.
Right on. And so the fact that our society isn't catered to these types of things, do you think that's by unfortunate coincidence, or do you think it's more by design, by powerful people who don't want to see the masses unlock this potential?
I don't think most people in power are that smart.
Right on.
Um, and so I don't think it's totally chaotic, but I think it's mostly a byproduct of the subtle and obvious ways we're trained to focus on commercialism and sort of the remaining frontier mentality of our cultural heritage in the U.S. of, you're just supposed to be going somewhere instead of being somewhere.
Wow. Yeah.
You're supposed to be building something rather than simply being in what you've built. That kind of stuff is pretty endemic and sometimes so deeply ingrained that we don't even realize we haven't stopped to just be,
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the big questions for me is if we just ended up in this situation by coincidence, or if somebody way more knowledgeable than us, someone in the higher echelons of the power pyramid actually got the ball rolling on a course that was going to be completely the polar opposite of the internal path. And I guess, it's more just a thought exercise and entertainment because there's really no, whether the answer is A or B, it doesn't really affect one's individual journey all that much, but it's fun to think about.
Yeah, certainly.
So let's talk about some more of these various practices, I guess. So can you tell us a bit about astral projection? I've heard this come up in a few of your podcasts.
Yeah. Well, but basically what we're saying is that there's this entire realm of mind that is every bit as rich, probably more rich because it's infinitely varied than the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first tasks of the beginning magician is to start to see past the physical world to the underlying energetic patterns that are behind it and within it. And that includes the energetic patterns of mind. We see the universe, including humanity, as being a skeleton of energy and mental patterns and archetypes and so on, that the physical world is actually just the clothing on that underlying energy. So if we can come to understand the nature of mind and come to refine our abilities to manipulate that within ourselves and interact with it on its own plane rather than physically, then the things we do in the subtle astral mental realms will tend to manifest physically.
Okay.
One simple way of talking about that in an everyday fashion would just be that we formulate some sort of mental conception of any activity that we're about to engage in physically before we engage in the physical activity. There's some sort of mental precursor to physical action. And most of the time we're doing that unconsciously and it's just, I'll lift my arm now. But what if we were able to go inside and get very specific in terms of the kinds of thought forms that we're manipulating and shaping? And what if we learned to put that to use to achieve the magical ends that we desire? So astral projection is one way of talking about going into this mental realm. It's often experienced as an out-of-body experience where you have some transfer of consciousness from, it seems, from the physical body to some energetic body
Mm-hmm.
that you then travel in. And it may feel like you've arrived at some sort of entirely unearthly, non-earthly landscape, and you're interacting with beings in that context, and you get information from them, and you're able to get insights into yourself and the nature of the world and the universe in ways that you wouldn't get if you were simply reading a book or interacting with the outer world. So we can train ourselves to get better at, if you want to think of it as leaving the body or simply, going into another state of consciousness, we can get better at doing this. And that's how I train people in astral projection and what's called scrying, which is specifically different techniques of tapping into the knowledge of these different realms of mind.
Right on. Well, man, we've pretty much ran the gambit. Are there any other major modalities that you think are important to point out that we might have missed?
Well, just I'll let the psychologist and me come out at the end here in a specific way. I think one of the things I address fairly uniquely within the Western magic tradition is the use of, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy approaches within the context of a magical path. So, got a chapter on this and a podcast episode on this, where we help our personality be a foundation for our magical work by not letting it be all bogged down in negative thinking and self-defeating attitudes and that kind of stuff. I think that many magicians actually underemphasize having a sort of balanced, healthy personality because they recognize that's not the end goal of what the work we're doing, but it won't help you much if you dive into intense magical work, but your life's a wreck and you can't regulate your emotions, or you can't, that's the foundation you're building on. So, I'm just putting in a plug for that additional angle on modern magical practice, using what we know from a century plus of psychological science and integrating that.
Right on. Good to know. So, yeah, very awesome. I love talking with you, man. Before we really call it in, would you like to leave the people with some more information about your website, book, or anything else you got going on?
Sure. As far as the book and the podcast, the best single source for that is just go to livingthelema.com, and you'll see information about the book and also the podcast. If you go to iTunes, all of the podcast episodes I've done for the last 4 or 5 years are archived there for download and subscription. You can also go to feedburner.com and search for Living Thelema if you don't prefer to use iTunes. If you're interested in the kind of training I've been talking about, the International College of Thelema is one gateway for that. That's intcot.org. The deeper tradition of the AA, that one-to-one training that I've been describing, is accessible via onestarinsight.org. And for those interested in the more sort of social, fraternal, and group-oriented training of the Masonic type, you might be interested in Ordo Templi Orientis. And around the world, the headquarters site for that is oto.org. Or in the U.S., it's oto-usa.org. So lots of resources out there, lots of great people doing important work. And if anyone out there listening to this is called to this particular adventure, don't hesitate to get in touch with one or more of these groups.
Very nice. Well, thanks again, man. It's been super insightful. Great show. You've cleared up a lot of stuff for me. Very much appreciated. Keep doing what you do and take care of yourself out there. All right, man?
All right. Thanks. It's been very, very enjoyable being here. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. There we have it, people. Practical magic for an impractical world. I love it. I thought that David was a great guest for that, so big thanks to him. In the Plus show, we talked about astral projection, crossing the abyss, tarot, divination, Crowley's Age of Horus, alchemy, healing magic, and that oh-so-sweet sexual magic. So you can always support the show with that $5 subscription at thehighersidechatsplus.com and get down with that. And the THC Plus subscribers also got their first exclusive, which was an interview that I had with Gerald Salenti of the Trends Research Institute talking about the economic and geopolitical trends to look for in 2015. You can also get that if you decide to sign up for Plus. But I have to say that this year, as it's coming to a close, it has been hands down the best year of my life. And I feel that I'm saying that all the time to you guys, and I'm trying to toe the line between showing appreciation and acknowledgement for how lucky I've become without bragging about it, because I never want it to come off like that. But for people who aren't linking up with me on social media sites, you should know that we're kind of becoming a big deal. Just last week, we outranked Alex Jones on iTunes by like 5 places, and the week before that, we ranked 31 across all the podcasts on Stitcher. Joe Rogan was number 8. We ranked higher than Ground Zero and Mysterious Universe and Duncan Trussell and even Mark Maron, who's considered to be one of the godfathers of podcasting. Those are big names, and I'm just some San Diego stoner, just one guy. It's kind of funny. And also not long ago, I got contacted by the show Portlandia, who wanted to use my Riot Cop shirt from Conspiracies on their show, and that should be coming up in January in the new season, but I have no idea to what extent you'll see the shirt, but it was enough for them to hunt me down to sign a release. And I'm just saying that all these good things have happened, and sometimes we'll do a magic show and I'll comment about how I like magic in an abstract way, but I don't see the effects in my personal life. And it was a listener who wrote me an email and really brought it to my attention and made me rethink that, because there is plenty of magic in my life, and I might not be doing a lot of formal study or participating in an initiatory brotherhood, but you're not going to hear me saying that again. Maybe I was expecting something more tangible, but when you really reflect on it, or when I reflect on it, it's very obvious there's magic there. So I don't want to curse myself by saying there's not. And it really has been the best year of my life. I can finally say I've made it in one of my favorite cities in the country, which is a hard one to make it in. I have a better partner than I ever thought I would have. She has been absolutely great and a long time coming, fueled by my hate for my retail management job, the hole I was in for 10 years. I built THC, and with the help of every great guest and all those who have co-hosted with me, Dave, Romeo, Adam Go Rightly, my main damies, Kyle and Jake, there's been a lot of positive support that was needed along the way, and from the listeners as well. But because of all that, I've been able to climb out of that hole. I guess I really still don't know how it happened, but some people have been following this show through it all, and I hope that you found something in my journey that you can take into your own life and use as an example of how to work towards building something that you love. And to tie it into today's show is in tune with your true will. And I think THC is very much in tune with mine. There's a famous quote that I really like that's something to the effect of, "I'm a huge believer in luck. The harder I work, the more of it I seem to have." And when I was stuck, I had a bitter, easy for you to say attitude. And it was like, instead of looking at positive examples and taking in that advice, I would find something about that person's success that I didn't have, and I would make an excuse to why I couldn't do that. Well, it's easy for him to make it. His dad was so-and-so, or whatever. But that's just a trap. Don't do that. Because if I can make something work, honestly, anybody listening to can as well. And as I've said before, the best jobs out there are the ones that you create. And if you're stuck at a job you hate at Best Buy or Home Depot, how did you get there? It's just interesting because it's easy to feel helpless in a job that you hate, but you filled out the application. So in reality, you manifested exactly what you put into practice. And then you sit there and you feel like nothing you put into practice ever manifests. It's a kind of a weird thing. I was in the same boat myself, and I'm still just kind of stumbling along trying to not fall on my face. And so far, so good, I guess. But, you know, Portlandia would have never called me up if I didn't at first start a t-shirt company. I couldn't have ever beat Alex Jones if I didn't first start with a show that nobody was listening to. And I'm confident that there's a life of great, harmonious, positive, magical things just waiting for you to step into it. But nobody can point you directly to it except you, because only you know what's going to work and be perfect for your situation and going to harness your skills and personality the best. Well, I guess maybe your holy guardian angel can help you out, but other than that, I don't know. I just wish the best for everybody, and many thanks to you for sticking with THC. Hopefully I'll be doing this for some years to come, and I think that's going to put the period on THC's 2014. Here's to everybody having a happy and joyous time crossing the abyss into the big 2015, and I'll see you there. Peace.